The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, tiny fragments catching the light from the chandelier above. Eleanor froze, her hand still suspended in the air where the glass had been a moment before. Silence swept across the grand dining hall as all eyes turned toward her. "Can't you do anything, right?" Thomas hissed through a forced smile, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Pick it up before you embarrass me further." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn as she knelt down in her designer gown, a dress she'd spent hours selecting for this dinner with her husband's family. She carefully gathered the larger glass pieces, aware of Vivian Blackwood's smug smile from across the table. Vivian, her husband's childhood friend and business associate, who somehow never missed an opportunity to be present at family gatherings. "Let the help handle it, darling," Margaret Kingsley, her mother-in-law, called out with feigned concern. "That's what they're for. We wouldn't want you to cut those common hands." Eleanor looked up to see Thomas's sister, Catherine, unsuccessfully suppressing a snicker behind her napkin. Standing slowly, Eleanor caught Thomas's gaze shifting appreciatively toward Vivian's plunging neckline. "Yes, of course," Eleanor murmured, resuming her seat as a maid rushed over to clean the mess. "Perhaps Eleanor isn't accustomed to fine crystal," Vivian suggested, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. "Some things can't be taught, no matter how much one tries to elevate oneself." "You would know all about elevation, Vivian," Thomas's father, Richard Kingsley, chuckled. "Your family has always had impeccable taste." The conversation resumed around her, but Eleanor had become invisible again, just as she had been for the past 3 years of marriage into the prestigious Kingsley family. Invisible except when she made mistakes. Invisible except when they needed someone to subtly mock. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Eleanor Hayes had been invisible long before she met Thomas. The orphaned girl from modest means, as they liked to call it, who had captured the heart of their precious heir, had a secret that would make their combined family fortunes look like pocket change. As dinner progressed, Eleanor watched Thomas lean toward Vivian repeatedly, their heads close together, sharing private jokes. His hand occasionally brushed against Vivian's arm, lingering just a moment too long. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed their intimacy. But tonight, as the Kingsley estate buzzed with preparations for the annual charity gala, Eleanor felt something shifting inside her. "Eleanor," Margaret's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "The florist called about the arrangements for tomorrow's gala. I took the liberty of changing your selections. Peonies are so provincial. We'll have orchids instead." "I see." Eleanor's voice was soft. "And I hope you don't mind, but I've asked Vivian to oversee the seating arrangements," Margaret continued, not bothering to look at Eleanor as she spoke. "She has such a natural gift for these things." "Of course she does," Eleanor said, her tone so neutral that no one at the table detected the storm brewing beneath. "It's no trouble," Vivian smiled, placing her hand on Thomas's arm. "Thomas and I were just discussing how we could rearrange things to better showcase the Kingsley Foundation's new initiatives." "Wonderful," Richard boomed. "With you two working together, I'm certain it will be perfect." Eleanor watched as Thomas beamed at his father's approval, the approval he constantly sought, the approval that seemed to matter more than his marriage vows. Later that evening, Eleanor stood alone on the balcony of their bedroom in the east wing of the Kingsley mansion. The cool night air soothed her burning cheeks as she pressed her phone to her ear. "He's crossing lines, Michael. And not for the first time." "You don't need this, Eleanor," her trusted advisor and oldest friend replied. "You never did. Say the word, and I'll activate the Hayes Foundation tomorrow." "Not yet." Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. "I came into this marriage believing in love, believing in Thomas. I need to be certain. The investigators sent the latest report. I forwarded it to your secure email." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Photos?" "Yes." "Of Thomas and Vivian?" "Yes." "From the Cayman trip last month, when he told you he was at a business conference in Chicago." Eleanor exhaled slowly, watching the manicured gardens of the estate stretch out below her. Gardens she had helped design, but for which Margaret had taken credit. "There's something else," Michael hesitated. "They're planning to push you out of the Gala planning committee entirely. Richard has documents drawn up to remove you from the Kingsley Foundation board as well, citing your lack of social connections as detrimental to fundraising." A cold laugh escaped Eleanor's lips. If they only knew. Eleanor, you're worth $8.2 billion in your own right. You control one of the largest private foundations in the world. You fund half the charities they pretend to support. Why are you still there, letting them treat you like this? She turned as she heard the bedroom door open. Thomas walked in, loosening his tie. I have to go, she whispered into the phone. Prepare everything we discussed. It's time. The morning of the gala arrived with the precision and chaos of a military operation. Staff scurried throughout the mansion, carrying flowers, linens, and crystal. Eleanor descended the grand staircase in a simple sheath dress, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. Eleanor! Margaret called, rushing toward her with a clipboard. Thank goodness. The caterers need someone to show them where to set up. Vivian and I will be busy with the decorators, and Catherine is handling the musicians. Of course. Eleanor nodded, taking the clipboard. Happy to help. And when you're finished, perhaps you could help the maids prepare the guest rooms. Some of our more important donors will be staying overnight. Anything else? Eleanor asked, her tone carefully neutral. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Well, yes. Thomas mentioned your speech needed some refinement. Vivian offered to help rewrite it. She has such a way with words. How thoughtful. As Margaret rushed away, Eleanor watched Thomas emerge from his father's study with Vivian beside him. His hand rested on the small of her back, guiding her through the doorway. Eleanor observed how Vivian leaned into his touch, how Thomas's eyes lingered on her face. Eleanor turned away, walking briskly toward the kitchen. It was the look that confirmed everything, not just infidelity, but love. Thomas was in love with Vivian. The same look he had once given her, now bestowed upon another woman in their home. For hours, Eleanor directed staff, arranged tables, and checked details that no one else would notice. By mid-afternoon, she slipped away to the small room that had been designated as her office, a stark contrast to Thomas's expansive study. She locked the door and opened her laptop. 10 minutes later, she closed it again, a sense of calm washing over her. Everything was in place. 3 years of meticulous planning, of documenting every slight, every manipulation, every lie. 3 years of watching the Kingsley family underestimate her while simultaneously relying on her quiet competence. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor! Thomas's voice called. Are you in there? Mother is looking for you. She opened the door to find her husband standing there, immaculately dressed in his tuxedo. For a moment, she remembered why she had fallen for him, his charm, his smile, the way he had once looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. You're not dressed yet, he frowned, checking his watch. Guests will arrive in an hour. I was just about to change, she replied. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. About your speech tonight? Vivian made some suggestions that I think would be more appropriate. Nothing major, just some polishing to make it sound more. Kingsley. Eleanor took the folded paper he offered. I see. Don't take it personally, Thomas said, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. Vivian just has more experience with these events. Thomas, Eleanor said quietly, do you love her? His face froze for a split second before he recovered with a laugh. What? Who? Vivian? Don't be ridiculous. She's a family friend. A family friend who rewrites your wife's speeches? Who helps your mother plan events that should be my responsibility? Who traveled with you to the Caymans last month when you told me you were in Chicago? The color drained from Thomas's face. You've been spying on me? I didn't need to, Eleanor replied. You've barely bothered to hide it. Thomas's expression hardened. This isn't the time for this conversation. We have 300 guests arriving, including half the state's political leaders and my father's business associates. Perfect timing, I would say. Eleanor, Thomas warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do not make a scene tonight. My family has given you everything. Remember where you came from and where you'd be without us. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the doorway of her tiny office. She waited until he disappeared down the corridor before pulling out her phone. Michael, it's time. Execute all plans immediately. By the time Eleanor descended the staircase that evening, the mansion was filled with hundreds of guests in formal attire. She wore a stunning red gown that she had secretly commissioned from a world-renowned designer, a dramatic departure from the conservative styles Margaret usually approved for her. Conversations faltered as she made her way through the crowd. Thomas, standing with Vivian and his parents, looked up and froze. His eyes widened at the sight of his wife transformed, not just by the dress, but by the confidence with which she carried herself. "Eleanor," Richard said stiffly when she joined them, "that's quite an attention-seeking choice." "Thank you, Richard," she smiled. "I thought it was time to stop hiding in the background." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Your speech cards are prepared by the podium. I highlighted the parts you should emphasize." "How considerate," Eleanor replied. "But I won't be needing them." Thomas gripped her elbow, pulling her slightly aside. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "We agreed on the revised speech." "No, Thomas. You agreed." "I never did." Before he could respond, Richard was tapping a glass, calling for attention. The crowd quieted as he welcomed everyone to the annual Kingsley Foundation Gala, speaking proudly of their philanthropic legacy. "And now," Richard concluded, "I'd like to introduce my daughter-in-law, Eleanor, who will say a few words about this year's initiatives." Polite applause followed as Eleanor took her place at the podium. She gazed out at the sea of faces, politicians, business leaders, socialites, all connected to the Kingsley empire in some way. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice clear and strong. "The Kingsley family has long prided itself on its charitable work, its social connections, and its impeccable reputation." Thomas visibly relaxed at her opening, exchanging a relieved glance with his father. "Which is why," Eleanor continued, "I believe in transparency above all else. 3 years ago, I married into this family believing in love and partnership. What I found instead was manipulation, infidelity, and the systematic erasure of my identity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thomas surged forward, but 2 men in suits, Eleanor's security team, invisibly present all evening, subtly blocked his path. "Tonight marks the end of my silence," Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. "And the beginning of the truth. For those who don't know me beyond being Thomas Kingsley's wife from modest means, allow me to properly introduce myself." On the massive screen behind her, the Kingsley Foundation logo disappeared, replaced by another emblem, the Hayes Foundation, one of the most prestigious and wealthy private foundations in the world. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. My parents, before their death, built one of the largest clean energy companies in the world. I've spent the past decade running the Hayes Foundation in secret, funding global initiatives that make the Kingsley Foundation look like a child's piggy bank." The room had gone completely silent. Eleanor could see Margaret gripping Richard's arm, her face ashen. Vivian stood frozen beside Thomas, whose expression had transformed from anger to shock. "In the spirit of transparency," Eleanor continued, "I should inform you that as of 1 hour ago, the Hayes Foundation has acquired controlling interest in Kingsley Industries through a series of shell companies we've been positioning for the past 2 years." Richard Kingsley staggered backward, reaching for a chair. "Additionally, I've personally purchased this estate from your creditors, Richard. It seems your gambling debts aren't as secret as you believed." As if on cue, Eleanor's phone chimed. She glanced at it and smiled. "Perfect timing. The transfer of the deed is complete. I now own the Kingsley family home." She looked directly at Thomas, whose face was crumpled in disbelief. "As for you, my dear husband, the private yacht you've been using for your tryst with Vivian? I bought that too, 3 months ago, from the shell corporation your father was secretly borrowing it from. The staff has been reporting to me the entire time." Eleanor stepped away from the podium, walking toward Thomas and Vivian. "I came into this marriage with nothing but love to offer. You repaid that with contempt, with betrayal, with the assumption that I was too naive to see what was happening. You were wrong." Thomas reached for her arm. "Eleanor, please, whatever you think happened." "Security," Eleanor said calmly, and the 2 suited men stepped forward. "Please escort Mr. Kingsley and Miss Blackwood from the premises. They're trespassing on my property." "You can't do this," Thomas whispered hoarsely. "I already have," Eleanor replied. "Divorce papers will be delivered in the morning." "Don't worry, I'm not taking anything that wasn't already mine." Which, as it turns out, includes almost everything you thought you owned. As security led a stunned Thomas and Vivian away, Eleanor returned to the podium. "To our guests, I apologize for the drama. The catering and entertainment will continue as planned. The only difference is that tonight's donations will go directly to the Hayes Foundation, funding programs for children who, like me, lost their parents too young. Thank you for your understanding." With that, Eleanor stepped away from the podium to thunderous, shocked applause. As she walked through the crowd, she caught sight of Michael standing near the exit, a proud smile on his face. Beside him stood a tall, distinguished man Eleanor had met through her foundation work, someone who had always seen her for who she truly was, not who the Kingsleys had tried to make her become. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer silent. And she was finally free. 3 months after the gala that became notorious in social circles as the Kingsley catastrophe, Eleanor sat in the glass-walled conference room of the Hayes Foundation headquarters. The Manhattan skyline stretched out below her, a fitting backdrop to the empire she now openly controlled. "The divorce is final," Michael said, sliding a folder across the polished table. Thomas didn't contest any of the terms. "He couldn't afford to," Eleanor replied, signing the last document without opening it. She already knew what it contained. How is the Kingsley family adjusting to their new circumstances? Michael's smile was grim. Richard had a minor heart attack when he learned the full extent of their financial situation. He's recovering, but the doctors have advised him to avoid stress. Difficult, given that he's now working as a consultant for one of his former competitors, Eleanor murmured. "And Margaret?" "Living with Catherine in the downtown apartment. She's been reaching out to her society friends, but most doors have suddenly closed. Amazing how quickly loyalty shifts when fortunes change." Eleanor felt a twinge of something, not regret, exactly, but acknowledgement of the human cost of her revenge. "And Thomas?" Michael hesitated. "He's been trying to rebuild. Got a job at a mid-sized investment firm. Vivian left him 2 weeks after the gala once it became clear he couldn't maintain the lifestyle she expected." "Of course she did," Eleanor said softly. "He's been calling. I've had his messages screened as you requested, but he's persistent." Eleanor stood, walking to the window. For 3 years, she had lived in a beautiful cage, playing the role of the grateful wife who had married above her station. Now, standing in her true domain, she wondered about the cost of revenge, not to the Kingsleys, but to her own heart. "What does he want?" she finally asked. "To talk. He claims to have realized his mistakes." "The usual." Eleanor turned back to face Michael. "And you don't believe him?" "It doesn't matter what I believe," Michael replied evenly. "What matters is whether you want to hear what he has to say." The intercom on the conference table buzzed. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Sullivan have arrived for your 2 o'clock meeting." Eleanor smiled at the mention of James Sullivan, the distinguished man who had stood beside Michael at the gala. In the months since, James had become an important part of her life, first as an advisor for the Foundation's new international initiatives, then as something more personal. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes," she responded. As she gathered her documents, Michael cleared his throat. "Thomas is downstairs, in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's been waiting for 3 hours." Eleanor froze. "Today? He comes every Wednesday. Has been for the past month. Security keeps a respectful distance, but he never makes it past the front desk." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. In her darkest moments during her marriage, she had fantasized about this, Thomas humbled, waiting for her attention like she had so often waited for him. "What would you like me to do?" Michael asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. The revenge she had planned so meticulously was complete. The Kingsleys had been exposed, their facade of perfection shattered. She had reclaimed her power, her identity, her life. But something still felt unfinished. "Tell security to send him up," she decided. "Give us 15 minutes, then interrupt with an urgent call if I haven't texted you." Michael nodded, leaving the conference room. Eleanor moved to the small private bathroom adjacent to the space, checking her appearance in the mirror. Gone was the subdued woman who had tried so hard to please the Kingsley family. In her place stood the CEO of the Hayes Foundation, confident in a tailored suit that cost more than the monthly rent of the apartment Thomas now occupied. When the conference room door opened again, Eleanor was seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents with practiced nonchalance. She looked up to see Thomas standing uncertainly in the doorway, thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice catching slightly. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," she replied coolly. "I have another meeting." Thomas stepped further into the room but remained standing. "You look incredible." "What do you want, Thomas?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered from their early days together. "I deserved everything that happened. The humiliation, the financial ruin, all of it. But I needed to tell you face to face that I'm sorry." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "For which part? The affair with Vivian? Letting your family treat me like a servant? Or simply for getting caught?" "For all of it," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "But mostly for not seeing you, the real you. For being so blinded by my family's expectations and my own ego that I couldn't recognize what was right in front of me. You had 3 years to see me, Thomas." "I know." He took a step closer to the table. "When we met, I thought I was rescuing you, giving you access to a world you could only dream of. I never imagined that I was more powerful than your entire family combined." Eleanor supplied when he trailed off. "That the woman you and your mother relegated to checking flower arrangements could buy and sell your family business without blinking." Thomas flinched. "I deserve that. But Eleanor, I loved you. Not for your money, I didn't know about that, but for you. In the beginning, at least. Until Vivian came along." "It wasn't just Vivian," Thomas admitted. "It was everything. The pressure from my family, the foundations I thought I needed to maintain. I lost myself trying to be the son my father wanted, and I lost you in the process." Eleanor studied him, the man she had once loved enough to hide her true self, to endure years of subtle humiliation, to plan an elaborate revenge. She was surprised to find that the anger that had sustained her for so long had faded, leaving only a hollow sadness for what might have been. "What exactly are you hoping for, Thomas? Forgiveness? Reconciliation? A job? Just a chance," he said quietly. "Not to go back, we can't. But maybe to start over somehow. To see if there's anything left worth saving." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened and James Sullivan appeared. Tall and distinguished in his bespoke suit, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. "I'm sorry to interrupt," James said, his eyes meeting Eleanor's with warmth, "but your next appointment is here. And the Tokyo team is waiting for our video call." Eleanor turned back to Thomas, whose expression had faltered at the sight of James. In that moment, she saw her husband clearly, not as the villain of her revenge story, nor as the prince she had once believed him to be, but simply as a flawed man who had made terrible mistakes. "Thomas," she said gently, "what we had is gone. I spent 3 years dimming my light to make you comfortable, and I won't do that again for anyone." "I wouldn't ask you to," Thomas replied, his eyes darting between Eleanor and James. "I just want a chance to know the real you, the woman I should have appreciated all along." Eleanor stood, gathering her documents. "The real me is busy rebuilding what your family tried to tear down. I have foundations to run, people who depend on me." "And James?" Thomas asked, unable to keep the jealousy from his voice. "Is someone who saw me clearly from the beginning," Eleanor replied, "who never needed me to be less, so he could feel like more." Thomas nodded slowly, the last pieces of his hope visibly crumbling. "I understand. Thank you for seeing me at least." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called out, "Thomas." He looked back, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "The position of regional director for our new community outreach program is open," she said. "It doesn't pay what you're used to, but it's meaningful work. Michael has the details if you're interested." Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "After everything I did, you'd offer me a job? Not because you deserve it," Eleanor clarified, "but because helping people rebuild their lives is what my foundation does. Even people who once hurt me." For the first time since entering the room, Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that reminded Eleanor of the man she had fallen in love with years ago. "Thank you. I'll think about it." After he left, James approached, standing beside Eleanor at the window overlooking the city. "That was generous of you," he observed. Eleanor shrugged. "Revenge satisfied something in me, but it didn't heal anything. Maybe this will." James's hand found hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "Ready for our meeting?" Eleanor nodded, turning away from the window and the past it represented. The invisible heiress who had endured years of humiliation was gone, replaced by a woman who stood firmly in her power, not defined by revenge, but by the future she chose to create. "More than ready," she replied, walking with James toward the door, leaving the shadows of the Kingsley family behind her at last. The Hayes Foundation's annual gala bore little resemblance to the Kingsley event that had changed everything. Held in the rooftop garden of Eleanor's Manhattan headquarters, it was elegant but unpretentious, focused on the foundation's work rather than social posturing. Eleanor moved among the guests in a simple black dress, stopping to chat with donors and recipients of the foundation's grants alike. From across the room, she caught sight of Thomas deep in conversation with the mayor about the community center the foundation had recently opened in a struggling neighborhood. In the years since she had offered him the position, Thomas had surprised everyone, especially Eleanor, with his dedication to the work. Stripped of his family's influence and wealth, he had discovered a talent for connecting with people and a passion for making tangible differences in their lives. "He's doing well," James observed, appearing at Eleanor's side with 2 glasses of champagne. The board was impressed with his presentation last week. Eleanor accepted the glass. "He's finding his way." "Thanks to you," James added. "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "Thanks for losing everything. Sometimes that's what it takes to discover who you really are." She would know. The girl who had once hidden her wealth and power to make others comfortable had emerged stronger from the shadow of the Kingsley name. The revenge she had executed so perfectly had been satisfying, but the true victory had been reclaiming herself. As the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself alone on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. She heard footsteps and turned to see Thomas approaching. "Great event," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "The new education initiative is going to change lives." "That's the goal," Eleanor replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the acrimony of their past gradually replaced by a cautious professional respect over the past year. Thomas hesitated before he looked up at her. "I'm seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, but she's a teacher at one of the community centers. No family fortune, no social connections my mother would approve of. Just a kind, brilliant woman who challenges me every day." Eleanor smiled genuinely. "I'm happy for you, Thomas. I have you to thank," he said quietly. "Not just for the job, but for showing me what real strength looks like." Before Eleanor could respond, James appeared in the doorway. "There you are. The helicopter's ready when you are. We don't want to miss the sunrise over the vineyard." Thomas looked between them. "Anniversary plans?" "Engagement celebration," James corrected with a smile. She finally said yes. Thomas's expression flickered for just a moment before he composed himself. "Congratulations to you both. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Eleanor." "Thank you, Thomas." As James headed back inside, Thomas turned to follow, but Eleanor called after him. "Thomas!" He looked back. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I forgive you." The words hung in the air between them, not an invitation to return to the past, but permission for them both to fully embrace their futures. Thomas nodded, understanding the gift she was offering. "Thank you." Eleanor watched him walk away, realizing that the revenge she had once thought would be her defining moment had become just one chapter in a much larger story. The invisible fortune that had given her the means to execute her plan had never been the money or the power. It had been her capacity to rebuild, to forgive, and ultimately, to find happiness on her own terms. As she turned to join James, Eleanor left behind the last remnants of bitterness that had once driven her. The woman who stepped into the future was neither the submissive wife the Kingsleys had tried to create, nor the avenging angel who had brought them down. She was, at last, simply herself, visible, powerful, and free. The end.